supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
This episode has been brought to you by Broad's Beard Care. Amazing products made right here in Central Florida. Almost messed that up again. In City of Winter Garden by Kelly Broad himself. Go to broadsbeardcare.com and check out all the product line he has there, including our signature 3B blend, which right now the reviews on it has been spectacular. So go to broadsbeardcare.com, use promo code. And am I the only one that's got that echo?
Yeah, you're the echo.
Okay. Let me see what we got going on here.
You're good now. I think you got it.
Okay. Yeah, we go. I think we got it. All right. So sorry about that little technical difficulty there. So go to broadsbeardcare.com, use promo code 3beards with a capital B. And you're going to save 20% off your entire order, and you get free shipping on all those. So at this time, we would like to introduce our guest of the evening, Mr. David S. Brody. He is a Boston Globe best-selling fiction writer. Unless I've miscounted, at least 12 novels, correct, sir?
13, 14 on the way.
Wow.
13. All right, there you go. He, graduate of Tufts University and Georgetown Law School, former director of the New England Antiquities Research Association, and you're an avid researcher of the pre-Columbus exploration of America. You have been featured on many things from the History Channel to PBS to Discovery Channel. You've got, I think it's 10 now in the Templar in America series.
Right.
That's great. And so you can find out more about him, one, through his site, davidbrodybooks.com, or you can go to amazon.com and check out all him, follow him there as a favorite author, and buy up his entire collection, and he will love you for it, I'm sure. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.
Oh, you're absolutely. And also joining us is Mark Eddy, our secret agent booking man, who occasionally shows up for us and helps us out on these things, and apparently is changing it up tonight because he's wearing clothes. So we appreciate him for doing that.
How about this beard too? Like, everyone has facial hair.
Yes, we're starting to. I like it. I like it. It's we got to keep that up, definitely. So, well, yeah. So tonight we are talking about his wheelhouse, the Templars in America. We've had a couple of shows where we've touched on this subject, and I've become more and more fascinated with it. And this is where David Brody comes in as our expert panel for it. And so we want to welcome you in, and I'm not really sure where the best place to launch off is, but at the same time, most people know a little bit about the backstory from the rise of the Templars to the persecution, the scattering, but where kind of pre-show I want to talk to you, and I think maybe we'll start here. Where do you think the first instance of the Templars setting their sights on the New World and coming over here into the Americas was their goal?
Yeah, so for people who don't know the backstory, it was Friday the 13th of October in 1307. Unlucky Friday the 13th was the day they were outlawed by the King of France working with the Pope. And the idea was the King of France wanted to basically take the Templar treasure because he owed him a ton of money, and what better way to get rid of your debts than to kill off your bankers, right? So that was the idea. So he raided the Templar treasury in Paris, and it was empty. Basically, the Templar treasure, the Templars must have had early warning, and they spirited their treasures out of France. And to this day, no one's actually found the treasure. And one of the theories is that they took it by overland to a place on the western coast of France called La Rochelle, and from La Rochelle up to Scotland, and then eventually they hid their treasure in America. Okay, so that's sort of the short story as to how they found their way here. When they first did that, I think that probably go back a couple hundred years prior to that, and there's evidence even earlier of sort of the writing being on the wall that the Templars had learned some secrets while in Jerusalem in the early days of the Crusades, the early 11th century, secrets about, whether it was the secrets of Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene or other secrets of Christianity that really didn't jibe with what the church was preaching in Europe. And the Templars came back and said, hey, we know the real truth. And the church said, keep your mouth shut. We don't want the real truth out there. We like what we got going now. And the Templars and the church started butting heads. And at some point, the Templars said, this gig is going to be up at some point. We saw what happened in the Albigensian Crusade in France, where the church went in and wiped out all the Cathars because they were practicing a different version of Christianity. We need to have a plan to get the hell out of Europe, if necessary, with our treasures. And so they had probably heard rumors while they're in the Middle East of, ancient lands off to the west. One thing led to another, and they found their way here prior to being outlawed. And then, of course, once they were outlawed, the remnants of their order, I think, continued coming over across to America, looking for a place to settle, hide their treasures. But that's sort of the shorthand of, started before, continued after they're put down.
Yeah, because one of your books, I apologize that title's failing me right now, but it deals around, I can look it up here too. It deals around the Arizona, aspects. And I want to say, is that the Powdered Gold book? Yes. Oh,
yeah, it's a Powdered Gold.
I pulled that book
in the story, and that's sort of a little bit different than what we just talked about. That's a time frame that doesn't really fit in what we just talked about. That's a time frame that goes back prior to the Crusades. There's some fascinating lead artifacts in Arizona that 5th, 6th century. But I guess the big picture is, the big story is that we know that Columbus was here in 1492. Yippee! We know that the Norse, the Vikings, came across as far as at least maritime Canada in the early 11th century. But I think there's been a series of explorers coming across, Mediterranean explorers, back and forth, starting with the ancient Phoenicians, the Irish, the Celts, the Welsh, perhaps. This is not we sort of view the Atlantic Ocean as some kind of barrier, but really it's a highway. And the ancient people, again, starting with the ancient Phoenicians, they had boats bigger than Columbus. They navigated by the stars. They were definitely traveling up as far as Great Britain to get tin, to make copper. They were coming around the coast of the tip of Africa up to the Middle East. So they were seafarers. And so they either would have intentionally or just being blown off course eventually found their way to America. So again, there's waves of explorers coming back and forth, the Templars just being one of many groups that found their way across.
Yeah, because I know, especially because one of the questions, it was a few interviews ago, they talked about it. And when you look at the Horn of Africa, I think not the Horn, the west coast of Africa and the east coast of South America, that distance is dramatically shorter than what people are picturing, like Spain to the Americas.
Right.
So it's entirely
out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just being blown off course at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are Phoenician
so, and that's
artifacts
one of the things. Yeah, because one of those, trying not to get too far off topic here, but it's because they found artifacts like Egyptian artifacts in the Amazon that shouldn't be there. Golden tablets that should not be here, and here we have cartouches. And you're looking at it, you're like, this should not exist here. So it's within the realm of possibility that these cultures could have made it over to here, and that's. What a better way to try to avoid the Vatican and get away from its reach than getting your stuff over to the New World, because this isn't, like I said, this isn't a normal way stop for people. So
think of it this way. So we know the Norse, the Icelandic sagas, they came as far as Vinland in the year 1000, 1002, 1000. They came back and forth 4 or 5 times. We know this. No one debates that. And we know they came at least as far as Newfoundland. And now most historians say that was a stopover point. They continued further south into Canada, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, perhaps Maine, perhaps Cape Cod, but at least as far as New Brunswick. So that happened. So it's only a hop, skip, and a jump down the coast to get to Cape Cod, Narragansett Bay. We'll get to the Newport Tower in a second. And to me, it would have been more surprising that after the Norse came over in the early 11th century, that nobody came until Columbus 500 years later. That would be the surprising story. Not that people did, but the people didn't, because there were plenty of good reasons. After the Norse discovered all this, they came back and talked about timber. Timber was hugely important in the Scandinavian area. To build your ships, you needed timber, but most of Scandinavia was deforested. If you look at Greenland as an example, deforested. So you needed timber to build your ships. Trading with the natives, all the fur and pelts and whatnot. Fish, of course, George's Bank. But there were plenty of really good land. I mean, land was at a premium in Europe. There's plenty of really good reasons to come back and forth. You would have kept it secret, of course. But to me, that would have been the bigger story, that the Norse came over 4 or 5 times and then stopped, and then no one came again until Columbus. It's not surprising at all to me that we had waves of explorers back and forth during that time period, probably before.
That's a really good point. I mean, because especially you're talking like timber. I mean, you're having between Canada and at that time, the Americas, there you would have had entire stands of timber that could easily be harvested, for making ships and everything else that you need over there. So, I mean, this would be just a vast wealth of resources, from that, just shipbuilding materials, to everything else, like the copper, the ancient pit copper mines in Michigan.
Right. They named, it was Vinland, Helluland, and Markland. Helluland means timber. They named one of the spots that they came to after timber because it was so important. And you mentioned the copper culture in the Great Lakes just a second ago. Mm-hmm. That's probably why the earlier explorers would have been over here. The Phoenicians, we know that they were getting tin on the southern coast of England and Cornwall. To make copper, you needed tin. To make bronze, you needed tin and copper. 90% copper, 10% tin. So we know where the tin came from. We don't know where the copper came from, but the Great Lakes region had huge amounts of something called float copper. So the Phoenicians are coming out of the Mediterranean, out the Straits of Gibraltar, up the Atlantic as far as England, southern coast. Did they continue on? We know they went as far as Iceland. Did they continue past Iceland all the way to the Americas? Probably. Again, plenty of reasons to do that. And that would have been, 1000 BC in that time frame.
Yeah, no, and that's, kind of one of the things. Dennis Stone, we had him on too, and you see some of these structures too, that, and I know in some camps they believe, native cultures, glacier stuff, but one of the ones, like especially with America's Stonehenge, looking at some of these structures. These, to me, have such a level of intricate construction, leveling, precise measurements, where this seems like somebody group, whether, the Templars, early Freemason groups, would come over and create these things because they seem to have more of a purpose. I mean, one of the things I wanted to touch on was the Westford Knight. You start seeing some of these carvings and things, and some of this evidence is leaning that there was something of a culture that knew how to make and how to construct these structures, other than just hey, I stacked a couple of stones and it looks cool.
Yeah, so we know the Native Americans did at some time build stone structures, but not very often and not very elaborate. They obviously didn't have tools to allow for, they didn't have metal tools to allow for stones to be worked. And so when we find stone structures that have been worked or designed similar, it's called a corbelling technique, similar to the chambers in the British Isles. We see structures like that in America. When the architectural, that's another thing entirely, but that's the Newport Tower. But as far as the chambers oftentimes match the construction. But let's talk about the Newport Tower, because to me, if we want to talk about the Templars in America, this is probably the best evidence we have. This tower is in Newport, Rhode Island. The traditional historians will tell you it was built by Governor Benedict Arnold, the great-grandfather of the trader Benedict Arnold, and they argue he built that between 1675 and 1677 as a windmill to replace a mill that had burned down. Huh. There are so many reasons that doesn't make any sense. Not the least of which is just architecturally, it's clearly a Romanesque style. If you know anything about the Puritans, they didn't build in the Romanesque style. I mean, every colonial structure in New England, nothing looks like that. That makes no sense at all as a design for a windmill. And the 1675 to 77 time period, which they say it was built, that's exactly the time period of something called King Philip's War, the Native American Chief Metacomet's uprising. So you might build a stone fort during that time period to protect yourself, but you wouldn't build a stone mill. It's too big a luxury. People don't realize that war on a per capita basis was the bloodiest war in American history. Many of the colonists thought they were going to get pushed back to across the Atlantic. So again, you just wouldn't build a windmill, an elaborate windmill at that time period during wartime. But there's a lot of things about that scream out medieval. It matches all the architectural features we see in medieval round churches, Templar churches in Europe during that time period.
Well, you make a great point too on that, about that structure, because if you look at most colonial structures, there's nothing that has that architectural thing to it, especially when you have something utilitarian, a utility thing like a mill, all those things were basic construction, square, block. They would build it. They would not go to the point. Yeah, they wouldn't see any value in having these elaborate arches, having these fancy, placement of stones. It was just like, we need to mill the grain, build the structure.
Yeah, can you put that picture back up again, the Newport Tower? Can you put that back up again? Because a couple things about that. We've had structural engineers look at that, and we say that the theory is that there was a windmill, there was a sail put on it, and they just laugh because the way that tower is designed, all the pillars support vertical weight, but there's no support whatsoever for any kind of lateral force. When you have a windmill, that's all you have is lateral force. They said any kind of significant wind, that thing's coming down on day one. It would never could have supported the lateral forces that a windmill has. And then secondly, there's a fireplace on the second floor. And anybody who spent any time on a farm knows if you start lighting an open flame around while you're gristing your flour, boom! It just makes no sense on so many different levels. So the mystery is, who built it and what is it? So, and that's why we got back to analyzing the architecture. The unit of measure is a Scottish ell. The construction technique is very similar to Scottish other Scottish structures in the Orkney Islands and in and around Roslyn. There's just so many things about it that tie back to the Templars. There's an amazing winter solstice alignment, illumination that looks a lot like the kind of things you see at Roslyn Chapel as far as nature worship. So there's just a bunch of different pieces of evidence that you look at that, and everything sort of points back to the Templars in the late 14th century probably would have built that. The remnants of the Templars would have built that structure.
Yeah, David, since you were just mentioning the Scottish ell and the Newport Tower has medieval features, you work in the legend of Prince or Henry Sinclair and his voyage. How does his voyage to America about 100 years before Columbus change our interpretation of America's history with, Columbus was the first European
right. So the legend of Sinclair, Mark, the story. It was 1398. The Sinclair family, by the way, is in the middle of all this. So going back in time of the original 9 founding members of the Knights Templar, that one of them was married to a Sinclair woman, and the Sinclairs had a long and close association with the Templars during their entire existence. And in fact, and then going forward, when the Templars were outlawed, many people think they sort of resuscitated themselves or resurrected themselves as the Freemasons, and the Sinclairs were the hereditary Grand Masters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry for a couple hundred years after that. So both going backwards in time and forwards in time, the Sinclairs were right in the middle of this. Prince Henry Sinclair, this is 1398, who we think came over to America. His grandson built Roslyn Chapel, the famous Roslyn Chapel, which we can talk about later, 1456. But they're in the middle of all this. And so what we think happened was 1398, Prince Henry Sinclair, who had a fleet of ships. And by the way, even though he was Scottish, on his mother's side, he was Norse. So he would have had passed down through the generations maps, charts, oral history of how the Norse came over to Vinland hundreds of years earlier. This would have been part of his upbringing. Again, he had a fleet of ships. We know from Vatican records that he was the guy who brought the bishops all the way to Greenland and Iceland. So he was halfway there already. Probably heard stories from people on Greenland and Iceland that there's more land to the west. And again, the Templar treasure, we think, ended up in the Sinclair area, up in Roslyn. Roslyn Chapel hadn't been built yet, but Roslyn Castle was in existence. And it would have been Sinclair who continued over, we think, built the Newport Tower. We think he was here as part of a voyage to hide the Templar treasure and look for a safe haven for the remnants of the Templar order that had been outlawed. And then, so the Western Knight, your question. So while in Massachusetts, they came across, they came up the Merrimack River to a town called Westford, which is about 30 miles inland. And there's a carving of a medieval knight. Basically, it's an effigy of we think, Sir James Gunn, one of Sinclair's lieutenants. Do we have that rubbing, by the way? Can you put that rubbing up? I think we have a rubbing of the.
Should have that image there.
Which one?
The knight one. It's going to look like
the Westford Knight.
I don't have that one.
Yeah, it's a little bit pink in color.
Did we not get that? Nope. I'll grab it right here.
The ones I have are just the rock ones in the email for some reason.
Okay, so the legend is in 1398. Sinclair came over with a group of men. One of the guys died, and they carved an effigy in the rock ledge to memorialize his death. And that effigy, it's a carving of a knight, and there it is.
There we go.
And so you can see his head, his shoulders, his shield, and most importantly, his battle sword. And this is what very similar to other effigies you find in Europe at the time, a medieval time period. That any knight worth his salt wants to be buried with his sword. And so that's what we have here. That effigy is still visible today in Westford. It's hard to see the head and the shoulders and the shield, but the sword itself is very apparent. And it's a medieval battle sword. It's not a colonial era saber or dagger of any kind. It's medieval, two-handed. Mel Gibson in Braveheart hit you over the head. It's called a claymore. Yeah, and there's it's hard to see the peckings in the rock ledge there, but we've got some better pictures of that, but you can definitely still see the sword. So that's the legend. The legend is it was a medieval sword carved in 1398. But there's a lot of other artifacts in the surrounding towns and communities around Westford that sort of support that. We've had other artifacts that are similar to that, something called the boat stone, which shows a medieval boat and a crossbow arrow. And that stone we were able to send to Scott Walter, the geologist. Many of the viewers are familiar with. There we go. That was found about a mile away from the Westford Knight carving. This stone, because it's not part of the rock ledge, we were able to ship this out to Minnesota to a geologist who put it in his lab and looked at it under powerful microscopes and determined that the weathering patterns inside the carved areas of the stone itself has been weathering outside for probably 12,000 years since the last ice age, but the carved areas exhibit different weathering patterns than the surface of the stone. Those carved areas obviously are not 12,000 years old, but you can compare the carved areas to the surface and determine how long the wind and the elements have been playing on that carved area, how much of the mica has worn away, how rounded are the grains, and you can make an estimate as to how long it's been out there weathering. And Walter's opinion was that the carved areas of that stone, the arrow and the ship, and the numbers at the bottom there are consistent with an artifact that's been weathering outside for about 600 years. And that dates us right back to around 1400. So even though we haven't been able to do that same kind of science on the Westford Knight carving, because again, it's part of the rock ledge, we can't move it into a laboratory. This kind of stuff, similar technique, dates back to the same time period we're talking about. This is another artifact. This is in Newport, Rhode Island, close to the Newport Tower. It's a Latin inscription, in hoc signo vinces. That is a Templar battle cry. Under this banner, we are victorious. So theory is that when the Templars landed along the shoreline here before building the Newport Tower, they carved this carving into the boulder. That had been lost to us until a big storm hit Rhode Island 7 or 8 years ago, and the sand blew off of it. And every high tide it covers back up again. You have to know where to go to find that. But again, another piece of evidence. And again, there's 7 or 8 of these different carvings around that seem to indicate a Templar presence pre-Columbus.
That's awesome.
I was kind of, we talked a little bit prior to the show when you're coming on, you have the show Curse of Oak Island, they're talking about those things. And, if you've watched on the show, they talk about markers. And the first thing I saw when I saw that image of the boat stone, the arrow, was it recorded where the stone was located? I mean, in the exact placement. So, maybe that arrow was directional.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Craig. And believe me, I spent a lot of time in the woods around there. So the marker was found, the stone was found in the 1920s during a project where they were widening the road. Importantly, the road that they were widening was an old Native American trail. So in colonial time period, of course, you built your roads over the trails. There was no reason to blaze a new trail. You just continued on with the Native American side. This happened to be the intersection of two ancient Native American trails. That's where the boat stone was found. So they were widening one of them, a road crew, and they found this stone. And they took it and they brought it first into a barn and eventually a museum. But unfortunately, no one recorded the orientation of it. And in 1969, an archaeologist, an amateur archaeologist who belonged to the same organization I belong to, New England Antiquities Research Association, went out there and started pacing 184 paces in every different direction he could find to see if he could stumble upon anything, because the number says 184 with an arrow. If you want to pull that back up again, you can see the 184 in the arrow. So he went into the woods and one before that. There you go. Up below the boat there, it was 184. And sure enough, he found the remains of an old, what looked like a foundation, 184 paces into the woods. And then he died, and he never did any more research on it. And then about 10 years ago, when I first got involved with this, I found his research, and I went out and found the foundation. And I went back to the town records, the old deeds and the old maps, the old town maps and stuff. There was nothing ever in the town records of any kind of colonial structure in that area at all. So one possibility is that foundation that was found, that he found, that I refound, it was 2 or 3 stones high, 40 by 30 feet. That may have been the site where Sinclair and his group spent the winter. It was again rectangular. They would have built a little low wall, and then what they would have done in that time period is take your boat out, flip it over, and make that be the roof of your structure, and sleep underneath that. So so we think that, and again, it's right along the Westford Knights near a river, and you continue up the river and you find the boat stone, and the pieces all connect. The dots all connect nicely as to where they would have gone during that time period.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask you that too. That was cool that you brought up the part of the river. I was just going to ask you if the boat played something into that directional, like if it was, sail this direction, this distance, and that
could be.
So kind of like it was just way marker.
And that boat. Yeah, I'm sorry. That boat, just like the sword, it's not colonial. It's not a colonial era boat. It's a medieval boat called a Knorr, Knorr. So again, if it's during colonial time period and you're just a kid and you're going out to carve, into a stone, I'm not sure why you do that, but if you were doing that, you would carve a sword and or a boat that you were familiar with, not a sword and or a boat that were 400 years earlier, right? Just you didn't have encyclopedias and the internet to know what they would have looked like at that time period. So, common sense plays a part in this analysis as well.
For anybody that's question, there's your boat.
Yeah, there it is. Good job.
Tiny boats, man. I'll tell you what.
Oh, there's a Smithsonian calling to tell us where the giant are buried.
Like, hey, we need to talk. Yeah, we need to talk to you about that stone. It's gone.
Hey, we're doing the show with the Beardos.
That's funny.
About that.
Yeah. No, that's what I said. This is our program. That's expected.
Yeah, it was like the.
So Craig, I like to say
that squeaky toy.
Yeah,
Mark. I like my training as an attorney, and I'm trained to sort of analyze and critique and weigh and parse evidence. And at some point, I look at it like, can I present this case to a jury, and am I going to win the case? And not any one of these pieces of evidence is probably enough to win it, but you start having 10 or 12 of these in a row. and it just becomes the whole total. It's called the totality of the evidence.
Yeah.
It's like there's awful lot of just coincidence going on here, or
There's something
there's
to
something
it.
really is going on. And take your choice, but obviously I know how I feel on this. But when I first started looking at this 14 years ago, I only knew about a couple of the pieces, and I wasn't totally convinced. But the longer I do this, and the more the evidence comes in, and year after year we get more of it, it continues to support what we think happened. Late 1300s, the remnants of the outlawed Knights Templar coming across here looking for a safe haven, and it does tie into the Oak Island story. By the way, I think that it makes perfect sense that they would have hid their treasure up there. It's the first thing you hit when you come across Nova Scotia, basically. So it does make sense.
Well, and that's all joking aside, just where it's just like, for the love of God, people find something, just throw us a bone, pull something up, that's not this little fragment. But I mean, it would make sense that if you were in the process of quick, load it up on the ships, we got to get it out of here. You're not going to just land a boat that's loaded with gold treasure and just leave it sitting out there, because you have all manner of boat traffic coming back and forth, and that's going to be easily seen. So you've got to get it. And if you have a group, I won't go too long with here, but if you have a group that has this ability to create architecture, it wouldn't be without the realm of possibility that they could build these elaborate, traps and stuff to help protect it as it's down there on the bottom, like they've been finding on the Oak Island. And so, which would make sense.
Take it to the next level, Craig. Don't forget the Templars were in the Middle East. They would have spent time in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And the pyramids have the same kind of booby trap flood tunnels as Oak Island does. So probably the way that the Templars would have gotten the idea to build this would have been stuff they saw in Egypt while they were, exploring in the Middle East. So that's one of the things that makes me think not pirates. I don't think of pirates as being really advanced engineers to be able to build flood tunnels, but the Templars, that makes sense.
Well, especially with that discovery, I can't remember, it was a few seasons ago when they actually discovered the stone, the stone flood tunnel. They actually found one of the way it's layered, and that would be. And now, actually, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about going back to the Newport Tower, the way that's constructed. You could almost see the same level of where they used the layers. They had those they had the layering of the different stone sizes.
Well, and this ties back into what I said earlier, that the Freemasons basically evolved the Freemasons evolved from the Knights Templar. And even though the current Freemasonry is speculative masonry, not operative mason, they don't actually build stuff with stone, their roots came from stone workers. And so there's a long and intimate relationship between the Templars and stone workers. And most of that comes from the Templar importance in building all those great cathedrals in Europe when they came back, Notre Dame and whatever else. But the Templars and the stonemasons and the Freemasons are all part of the same group. So stonework was important to them.
Yeah, that's cool. Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, David, you were just talking about, since you're a lawyer, you have to look at the evidence, and
when it helps me.
Yeah, one of your Echoes of Atlantis book is a nice combination of like the Prince Henry Sinclair legend. You're also incorporating the legends of Atlantis. You also work in science into all your novels as well. You send Cam and Amanda to Göbekli Tepe. That's 12,000 years ago.
Right.
It's like one of the oldest structures built by humans. But you're also, so we have that sample of, okay, there is this ancient evidence, the carbon dating proves it. But you also have the your eel story and the nostophilia.
Yeah.
Can you
So
explain that aspect of the science that you work into your books, along with the looking at the Newport Tower is similar to the Romanesque architecture?
right. So that's a good question, Mark, because it's sort of a broad way of looking at all this. One of the big, I get this question a lot, is if Brody, if you're right, how come no one else has figured this out before you? And it's not like I'm smarter than anybody else. That's not it at all. Partly it's because the internet allows us to look at all this evidence really for the first time with a touch of a finger. But also, if you're an archaeologist, you're only looking at things that come out of the ground. If you're a cartographer, you're only looking at maps. If you're a geologist, you're only looking at the rocks. If you're a liberal arts guy like me, and all those parents who feel like they're wasting their kids' tuition on liberal arts. But the one thing is, liberal arts major can be is you can sort of look at all of this. And so when we look at, as an example, the evidence of Atlantis, what we're really doing there is saying, let's not two things. One, what we don't know is far greater than what we do know. It used to be that we thought Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilization 6,000 years ago. We all learned that, right? Where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet. That's where civilization began. And then Göbekli Tepe comes along, and it turns out, no, it's not 6,000, it's 12,000. So we've actually doubled the age of civilization. All those smart archaeologists and historians, they insisted that it was 6,000, and they were wrong by a factor of a half, okay? So that's one thing. Mark, yeah. So it answers the whole eel thing. So it's not just archaeology, it's not just cartography, it's not just geology, but you have to use all the disciplines. And in the case of the eels, what Mark's talking about is that these eels, the freshwater eels in America, come down and into the ocean, and they swim out to the middle of something called the Sargasso Sea. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that's where they spawn. Even though they're freshwater eels, they go back to the salt water to do that. And it turns out that the freshwater eels in Europe do the same thing. They come across and they meet their cousins from North America in the middle there. And the point is, why would eels from both continents meet in the middle unless at one point, way back in the past, they had both evolved from a continent that was in the middle? And when the continent sank, they went their separate ways. But nostophilia, the instinct to go back to your native homeland, is what brings them back for their spawning. It's not just the eels, it's the butterflies also. But again, that's science. And I get into trouble when I get too deep into science, because I'm not a scientist. But the point is, the big picture is that we need to look at not just what the archaeologists tell us and the historians tell us, because not all history is written. The Native Americans have a rich and a live oral history that's important too. And they tell us, by the way, we'll talk about that. Hopefully the Native Americans tell us, yeah, that Prince Henry story, the Newport Tower, the Templars, that's all true. Maybe let's look at that battle flag in a second. But Mark, to answer your question, the reason that's important is because we needed to look at all various disciplines. It's not all going to be told just from the archaeologists. And so often they feel like they have all the answers. They say, if it didn't come out of the ground, it doesn't count. And the reality is, look, when's the last time you ever stumbled upon an archaeological dig in your neighborhood? Very little, infinitesimally small amount of the land has been archaeologically dug into, understandably so. But to act like all the answers come from these occasional digs is ridiculous. There's plenty of other pieces of evidence we can look at. Can we pull up that battle flag, by the way, the Templar Mi'kmaq flag? Do we have that? I sent that over, I think.
Yeah, Julianne said, what's our obsession with Freemasons? And the funny thing is Chris isn't here tonight, and he is a Freemason. And I just feel like we need to talk about Freemasons more, because it gets brought up by everything we talk about, but we don't know anything about them, And it's
and I'm not a Freemason myself. I spent a lot of time giving lectures in their lodges, so I know I'm friendly with a lot of them, and obviously it's a key part of my research. Part of the reason that. So the question is, are they an organization with secrets, or are they a secret organization? That's really the dilemma. I think the answer is they're probably a little bit of both. But the question, to me, the most important question is, did they really evolve from the Knights Templar? And officially, they will tell you no. But when you sit down with them after a couple of cocktails at the end of a lecture, they'll sort of nudge you and say, the thing about you said about the Templars, you're right about that. You're not supposed to tell me that, but they do tell me. And so I have no doubt anymore that we're right on with that stuff. And Chris probably can't tell you that, but he could probably wink at you when you mention it.
Yeah, of course. The one time he's not here, we bring it up more.
Yeah. We're looking. He's not seeing that image. I mean, I thought that one I sent over there did have it. I apologize. We're looking at that real quick.
Okay. Should I send it to you again, Craig? Or
yeah, if you want. Like I said, we'll get there. And no, I'll get.
Can I send it to you by email or?
Yeah, if you can send it by email, yeah, we'll get it there. So what? Kind of while you're doing that too, I was going to touch on when they said, well, why you? If nobody else is, well, somebody has to be first. There's got to be somebody that makes the discovery. So why not you make that discovery? When people ask you, it's like, well, how come you've come to these conclusions?
Yeah, again, part of it is just fortunate to be living in the time of the internet, because again, 20 or 30 years ago, there were lots of people like me who found artifacts. I lived in Westford for a long time, so I was fortunate enough to be able to look at the Western Knight and the boat stone and other things in the area. But as far as I knew, there were no other artifacts that sort of went with it in other parts of the country. Everybody had in their backyard one or two interesting artifacts, but no one knew enough about each other's artifacts to put them all together. So we all had one or two pieces of the puzzle. Now with the internet, we can look at each other's pieces and say, wait a second, your piece fits together with my piece, and that fits with Mark's piece, and Craig, your piece also. And we're missing some of the pieces still, but look at this. There's a picture starting to form here. Before the internet, you couldn't do that. And so, look, having said that, and Mark, I'm not sure if you knew this. I haven't written about this in any of my books yet. I just learned this. I used to think that whole Prince Henry Sinclair story, that just came about in the last generation or two, starting in the 1960s or 70s. I was doing research on the World Fair in Chicago in 1892, 1893, right, which was really a 400-year anniversary celebration of Columbus. And there were demonstrations in Chicago against that because there were a bunch of Scandinavians who said, wait, Prince Henry Sinclair discovered America before Columbus. So back in the 1890s, there were people doing the same thing I'm doing now, talking about Prince Henry Sinclair coming to America in the 1300s. I was blown away by that. I thought, I thought this is relatively new stuff, but what's the expression? What's old is what's new is old. What's old is new again, right? What's old is new again. That this has been going on for 130 years at least.
Yeah, it's so old, it's new. Yeah, that 1893 World's Fair is fascinating. I've heard a little bit about it. It's
there we go. There's the flag.
There are a lot of really interesting people attending that, and you just wonder how often they communicated and what were some of the influences that came out of that World's Fair. But we'll save that for another show.
Let's put that flag back up again, guys. Can we do
that's
that
my fault. There's a bunch of photos in the email that I didn't see. Here we go. That's my fault.
So on the question of Native American oral history, both the Mi'kmaq tribe up in Nova Scotia and also the Wampanoag tribe here in Massachusetts, both have basically gone on record saying, that that the Templars were here, they built the Newport Tower. The story of Prince Henry Sinclair is that he first landed in Nova Scotia in 1398 and overwintered with the Mi'kmaq tribe, and then worked his way down in 1399 to the rest of New England, Massachusetts. But here you can see the Templar battle flag on the left-hand side and the Mi'kmaq flag on the other. And again, it's one of those things like, boy, it's either a heck of a coincidence or there's some kind of relationship going on there. Like that's just a lot to sort of explain away. But again, the Native Americans, so even though their oral history is not written, it's still sacred to them, and they pass it down generation to generation. It's no less important to them than our history is to us. They just happen to do it verbally. But again, their history is that this Templar group did come over before Columbus, and they sort of laugh at the whole Columbus thing because they have a history of many waves of explorers coming back and forth, as we talked about earlier.
Now, this kind of touched a little bit on it, and kind of back to what we were talking about before too. One of the things like I've noticed, especially when you get to Göbekli Tepe, you get to all these things. I think one of the biggest things like I've noticed is I have a book, Forbidden Archaeology. I love that book. I mean, it's a textbook. I mean, it's not something that you just pick up, and you just flip through it all. But they even have pictures of the laser. It looks like a laser engraved seashell. And it's these type of artifacts that are found, and I think kind of like that battle flag, kind of Göbekli Tepe, they don't like to admit that these things exist because it takes your life's work and completely tosses it on end. Everything
Right.
I've found in myself my profession, my tenureship at this university is based off of this bedrock, and I built upon it. Well, now we're ripping that bedrock out from underneath them, and their whole tenure is now based off of something that no longer exists.
A lot of the researchers I work with in this little tiny corner of history I'm in, they tend to sort of see this grand conspiracy that, we joked about the Smithsonian hiding artifacts before, and this whole conspiracy that people don't want this history told for whatever reason. I don't necessarily think that's it. I think it's more like you just said, Craig, where people have carved out an expertise in a certain area and they become really defensive of that territory. And they frankly don't want to have egg on their face by being proven wrong after spending 20 or 30 years telling everyone this is the way it is. If they're wrong, now they just look silly. So they defend their position even against the evidence because it's just human nature. I don't even blame them for it. But I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's a bunch of people sitting around, in a smoky room saying, let's not tell the world. I just think people stake out a claim and then they're stuck with it and they don't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah, because one of the prime examples, we talked about it just a little earlier too, Dennis Stone, America's Stonehenge. That right there, that's one of those things where if this is true, if this is in fact what, this is hypothesized, this is a theory that if these were correct, this changes everything. Because I said, all of us were raised with Columbus discovered the New World. We went through, we go through that whole thing. And then we start hearing, well, no, the Vikings were here before, Phoenicians were here before. If you start getting to the point where there were so many cultures here prior to this thing, this entire thing that all of us have been raised on is gone. You can't.
I'm not sure when's the last time Dennis was on your show, but just back in September, the group I belong to, again, New England Antiquities Research Association, and people are interested in that. I recommend that organization. It's short money to join, $25 a year, I think. And basically what we do, we go out in the woods in New England and we look for these artifacts and these stone structures and we try to figure it out. So nice. One of the things we're doing now, one of our members died and left us a bunch of money for research. There's a new technology called OSL. It's basically L is luminescence. And what we're really doing there is taking a look at stone structures and through a scientific process I want to begin to try to explain, you can take dirt from behind a chamber or a stone from the inside of a chamber and extract that in such a way that sunlight doesn't hit it when you're taking it out, and bring it to a laboratory and determine when the last time was that dirt or stone saw the light of day. And that would presumably be the date of construction.
Wow. That's cool.
And by doing that, we took samples at America Stonehenge, about 8 or 9 different sites in New England that we spent a week taking samples on, and those are out being tested now. But like you said, Craig, if we can determine that the construction date of America Stonehenge was just say 3,000 years ago, all of a sudden that gives us a huge piece of information. Now, that obviously it can't be colonial. So now, is it Native American or is it something else? The Native Americans lay no claim to that site, and as much as they are very aggressive as they should be in maintaining their historical sites and don't want anybody trampling on them, that again, as they should be, they lay no claim to that site. That site, I brought Native American tribal elders up there, and they say, this is interesting, but it's not ours. So if it's not theirs and it's 3,000 years ago, who did it? Now we're like, okay, you got to tell me it wasn't aliens. You got to tell me somebody who did it. And now we're left with Phoenicians. So we're waiting on those test results. But
that'll be fascinating. I'd love to hear the results of that.
I'm sorry, what, Craig?
no, I would love to hear, when those results come back. I mean, if there's some way, like, I don't know if Dennis is going to put those up on his site. I mean, if we could find it, that would be absolutely fascinating to get that.
Yeah,
we'll be all over that. Unless it comes back as a colonial, then of course we'll never mention it out loud or anything like that. We'll be like the guys we just talked about. No, but seriously, so we're expecting those back. It's going to take a while because unfortunately the guy who does this is a professor at a university, and all his graduate students, no one's on campus right now, so we can't do any testing. So we're sort of stuck a little bit waiting for these things. There's a big backlog of work that needs to be done. And we'll get there on that. Obviously, that'll be big news.
Yeah, and for anybody that's new to it, if you have a sample that comes back with the information you don't want, it got contaminated. The sample was contaminated. We had to
an outlier.
Yeah.
But the lawyer in me loves that. Other than archaeology, what professional discipline allows you to throw away evidence? I would love that, Your Honor. We're gonna. I suggest I move, Your Honor, that we not look at the fingerprints that match my clients because. Let's just get rid of those.
All right.
Yeah. Yes.
That's awesome.
We're pretty sure. Yeah. That's just we can't. We can't go with that. No. That's not going to work. Yeah. I just
pick on the archaeologists, but let's pick on the archaeologists because let's face it, they're the ones who keep saying, well, if it wasn't from evidence from an archaeological dig, it doesn't matter. Now, to their credit, the state archaeologists from New Hampshire did come with us to America Stonehenge when we did that luminescence testing.
That's cool.
And they are open to the possibility of that testing being a way to date structures. So that was good. That was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, Dave, throughout your books, you have your characters going to a lot of places across America, researching these out of place artifacts. You've done a lot of that in preparation for these books. You did go to places like the Humbeden Stone Circle. I probably
Hunebed. Yeah, Hunebed in the Netherlands. Yeah.
And you saw the Ghent altarpiece as well. So in that your Treasure Templari book, you're not looking at only really ancient material. You kind of have like an affinity for a lot of these medieval characters like Prince Henry Sinclair or this the Van Eyck brothers artwork.
Right.
So how do you incorporate all these travels into your writing? It's not just you're just Googling stuff and linking. Does the traveling make you more appreciative of the experience?
So the surprising thing is, it seems like wherever we end up going in Europe, we run into Templar legends, Templar secrets. In the case of the Treasure Templari, this Ghent altarpiece painting, which I think Craig just put on, or Viking put on the screen a second ago, which is something that was a fascinating story behind that. It's in Belgium. It's a piece of artwork that Hitler tried to steal during World War II. Did steal during World War II because he was convinced it was a secret map to the Templar treasure. And we talked about the Templar treasure being spirited off to the New World, perhaps after 1307, but maybe not. Maybe it's still in Europe someplace. Who knows? But Hitler was convinced that this painting was a secret map to the Templar treasure, and that sort of triggers that whole book. But it seemed like no matter where we went to the western coast of Ireland, and I was amazed to find out that Christopher Columbus had been there in like 1477, and that he had spent time praying in a Templar church. And I use that whole thing to sort of trigger the book of the Swagger Sword. But it seemed like the Templars were such an important part of Europe for about 200 years. They were the most powerful force in all of Christendom, and they had their tentacles every place. And so it seemed like no matter where we go in Europe, we find really cool Templar things, and that, that just oftentimes triggers another story. What's interesting, Craig, you had said we're going to spend an hour together tonight, and who knows where the conversation is going to go, but you wanted to start by talking about Treasure Templari, and it was like 56 minutes into it, we finally started talking about it.
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes. It's kind of perfect.
Yeah,
I love it because, especially with those conversations, is because we've gotten on so much other information that we didn't plan on. And I've been, like you said, it's 56 minutes, and I didn't even till you said that, I didn't even realize we were already in the 56-minute mark. I was like, I've been completely lost in the conversation. I mean, it only feels like it's been 20 to 30 minutes, and that's that's awesome. And so that's cool. Yeah,
look, so I've written. I just finished my 11th book in the series, and I guess that's the big takeaway for me. When I first started this, I had no idea I was going to go down a rabbit hole, and I had no idea. But 14 years later and 11 books later, I'd still be down there, in need of a shower and a change of clothes. Obviously, it's a long time to be down one rabbit hole, but I had no idea how much stuff there was, how much information there was, how many of these artifacts there were. It's crazy, and like again, we learned in law school. Follow the evidence, and when there's that much evidence, something's going on. You got to explain it somehow. You can't, like you said earlier, you can't just keep throwing evidence away. At some point, you got to say, look, something's going on. I got to pay attention to it. And so, Mark, you asked about the research. To me, the research is even more fun than the writing because it just never stops. I just once in a while, Mark, I'll circle back to you and say, hey, I'm going to do another book. You got any ideas for me? And you're the one who turned me on to all these fascinating artifacts in the Ohio River Valley the book I'm just finishing up now, Roman artifacts in the Ohio River Valley. That'll be the next time. Hopefully I'm on with you guys. We can talk about that. But it just seems like it never ends. There's so much of it.
Yeah, we'll have to bring you on there because that was one thing I was going to tell you too, especially about your books. I've started, I got the PDF and I've started reading the Treasure Templari, and I really I've fallen in love with this genre of writing the faction style.
Yes, I love it. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's
I enjoy that.
And I love the fact that, other writers such as, James Rollins, Dan Brown have decided to follow you and use your style.
I don't think they follow me. I think
yeah.
But the one thing I do that they don't do is I put pictures of all the artifacts in the book.
Yes, which is
so if you
awesome.
see a painting or an artifact or a site or the Newport Tower, I want readers to know I'm not making that stuff up. That's the fact part of the faction, right? Those are actual. Now the story behind it is a story, it's fiction. But those sites and those artifacts, if they're in my book, they're real, and I want the readers to know that because to me that's the most fascinating thing of all. The stuff is actually out there. You can go see it.
And that's what I love. It's you have, as I'm only a couple of chapters in on it so far, but I love the fact how you're able to craft the story around not only something that exists. It's so cool to have a fictional characters, but you are engrossed in the fact that I love as you're reading it, you're forced to stop and Google. You're like, I didn't know about that. So you've got to go out there and you're like, oh, I didn't know anything about this one. And you start looking at here, you're like, oh my God, you see all these pictures, all these things about it. And then you look back and forth and then you're right. So it's kind of like choose your own adventure, but you're doing it, and as you go through, I'm learning at the same time as I'm enjoying this visual movie that I'm, experiencing as I'm reading your books. And so I've loved it so far. So very well done in that book.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. I know you're a big reader, so that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah, Dave, could you explain how you have your books set up with reoccurring characters? Like here.
Yeah, so it's similar to the way Dan Brown does it with and I'm blocking on the guy's name, the Tom Hanks character, the
James Langdon.
Robert
Langdon. Robert Langdon, yes.
Robert Langdon, yeah. So it's the same thing. Basically, the books are all standalone. You can pick up any one of them and start. You don't have to do them in order. But it's basically the same character, and he's on a new adventure. He's got a family that recurs well, and things happen. But essentially, each of them is a new adventure. You can pick it up any place you want. But the first one, Cabal of the Western Night, the main character, his name is Cameron Thorne, basically follows the clues of the Western Night and the Newport Tower in the same way that I did. Sort of going through the. Pardon me, I'm sorry about that, guys. Going, sort of going out and following the breadcrumbs through the woods and figuring this all out the same way I did. So, but again, they're all standalone and they're all different adventures. And boy, do I have a lot of fun writing them.
That's awesome.
That's cool. David, I mean, you definitely gave a teaser, especially that one. I need to, definitely would like to have you back on if that's, if you're willing to do that. I mean,
sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because this,
you guys can't shut me up. I'll talk all day about this stuff.
No,
Mark, I love this stuff. So.
Yeah, that's kind of where we are. It's like we try to explain to everybody. It's like we're laid back. We like to just have a conversation because there's no agenda. There's just I simply just want to get people's story that there's people like in our audience that have never heard it before. And as we've been going through this is I won't lie. I mean there was probably a really low chance I would have come across these book titles, but now as I'm reading this one. This is probably going to be the one where before long I'm going to have polished off, every single one of the series because as I get into it, I absolutely love it. It's very well done.
People who are into this kind of stuff, they do go through the whole series. Now it's not for everybody, I get that, but people who do like this kind of stuff, they eat this up. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Craig. Thank you.
You're welcome. You also have really well crafted. International bad guys that are after the same artifacts that Cam and Amanda are studying. You do have great tension, espionage, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, they need to be fun. So, Craig, you mentioned earlier they're factions. What I think of them as is. You're going to learn something while you're on the roller coaster, but there needs to be a roller coaster, the fun part of it, and then the knowledge comes along with it, and it sort of adds to everything. So you got to have a good villain, Mark. Of course.
No, they're really well done, and it's I've told you that. It's your novels are very similar to like North by Northwest, Marathon Man.
Clive Cussler is sort of a more modern version of that kind of thing. Yeah, Cussler, Dan Brown. Yeah,
I can't wait. Start reading.
Yeah, but we definitely like when we get you out. We'll have to touch on a little bit more of like the Ghent Alter piece, and then the Nazi angle of like what they were looking for. And so, since we running out of time, but I once again. Go to davidbrodybooks.com, support in there. Do you have a link on there for people to get a signed copy from you by any chance?
If you go to davidbrodybooks.com, there's a button to email me, so you can email me if you want signed copies for the holidays or whatnot.
Okay, perfect. Because I want
once you get to that site, you can find me easily on that.
Yep. Okay, and then obviously right there, Amazon, and right now, just to give a shameless plug to Amazon for our overlord Jeff Bezos, if he's as he's listening in. If you go to Kindle Unlimited right now, you basically for the price of the Kindle Unlimited, you have access to your entire work. I looked in there, and it's just that right now these books are free for Kindle Unlimited, and so as you read these, as we learned from our other guest Max Hawthorne, you actually get credit the more that's read during these things. Yeah. That works towards you.
Yeah, so it's a good deal for authors. If you guys go to that Kindle Unlimited and you read my book, I make probably almost the same royalty as I would if you bought it on Kindle. It's not a significant difference. And
okay, good. That's what I was worried about.
Like Craig, like you said, people who read one tend to read all 10 or 11. So, I'm happy to give them away, honestly, because I feel like as an author, there's an old saying: you never make money selling a book; you make money acquiring readers, acquiring fans. So, oftentimes I'll give one or two away on Kindle, and hopefully people get interested. And they're cheap; they're less than $5 on Kindle, and they're only $15 for the book itself.
That's
I got practice law if I wanted to make money, but this is a passion of mine, obviously.
Yeah, that's what happened. We had Dina Ray on. She I forgot the name of the book, but she gave us one free copy, actually 2 free copies. And then it was so good that I read through it, had to get the sequel right away. And I feel like if I get the first book or any of the books, I have to read all 10. It's just going to be a nonstop roller coaster, or I have to get all of them.
Yeah, that was what, Crowns and Cabals?
Yeah, Crowns and Cabals. And what was the first one, Craig? I can't remember the first name of the book, but I bought the sequel because it was
bestseller.
It was fiction, obviously, but she made it seem so real that I was like, this is scary. So yeah, I can't wait to read your books.
So everybody go to
book. How many books you ever read in your life that had the Cabal in the title? And that was the Cabal of the Western Night, and then you had the other Cabal. So
yeah, I'm excited.
There you go.
I really am.
It's serendipity.
Well, hey, so everybody, like I said, go to davidburdybooks.com, go to Amazon, try out Kindle Unlimited, and you've got access to his works. And like I said, I can't personally attest for it, but except for the 3 chapters I've read, and they are fantastic. There you go. So I highly recommend that. So
thank you, Craig.
Thank you again. Yeah, get to the family. Want you to please tell them thank you for sharing your time with us, because we know how valuable that is, and we can't thank you enough, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with you guys and meeting you guys, and look forward to doing it again.
Yes,
awesome. Yeah, we same here. I can't wait to the next one. So thanks again, sir.
Mark, thank you as well, Mark. All right, take care, guys. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
And then Mark, thank you again for joining with us. Appreciate it as always. And we'll try to get you on. And like I said,
yeah, I'll be back next week.
Yep. We'll get you on from occasional ones because we definitely got to have you hand little teaser there. We are going to foray into our first ever episode where we're going to tackle a subject that I know very little about other than just I like music.
Oh,
I couldn't tell. Yeah, because we're going to be.
We have Mark on and Javier coming on because
with Boone Frog, just talking about his story and the things he's involved with, the endorsement he's received, and I know Mark is a really big fan of his friend, and I was more than happy to have him come back on again, and this one should be a lot of fun as well. So that, like I said, we're looking forward to that. So. Mark, thank you for wearing pants tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and not shaving. I might have been mistaken for being Chris.
Yeah, I know.
That's great.
That's awesome. Well, sir, appreciate it. So we will see you next week, and I'm sure somewhere between now and then I'll be talking with you. So
okay, well, I'll be tuned in to watch you guys with my boss here in a few minutes.
Yep. We'll try to dig up the dirt on you here. So, all right, sir. Well, thanks. Appreciate you coming on with us.
Thank you, Mark.
I had fun. Thank you.
All right.
This
episode was brought to you as always by Broadsbeard Care. Made right here in Central Florida. Go to broadsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off your entire order with free shipping. That bottle you just saw up there was a 3 Beards blend. It has been getting amazing reviews, and everybody that's tried it absolutely loves it. So check out all of his the beard soap, beard balm to make sure it stays in the place you want. Lip balm, Chris swears by that stuff. He absolutely loves it. He's got scissors. I use those all the time to trim the beard. Comb. You just go through. He's got a complete line. Just check him out. He's also got there's gear you can buy that stuff. So I can go on and on and on. Check him out. Go to Nanny Cakes, Nancy Burke's other sponsor. Go to Nanny Cakes 407 on Facebook, or you can give her a phone call if you're in the Central Florida area at 407-923-2898, and you will get an amazing deal at 15% off your cake order, which is a crazy deal that she's giving out. And if you're outside of the Central Florida area, I think we can convince her to put a couple of plastic forks inside the box for you too. It'll still be amazing. And if you want, we can personally draw 3B on the fork for you. And I'm not sure if the Sharpie will taint the taste of the cake or not, but hey, we'll at least do that for you. So patreon.com Three Beards podcast. Become one with the Beardos. That is the way to do it. We appreciate the support. Happy birthday to Chris's wife, Willisa. I hope you enjoyed the little gift we sent you. Yeah, it was, that was for you. So, yeah, happy birthday to you. And today is Veterans Day. Thank you to all the veterans. Can't thank you enough for your service. Appreciate everything that you did for us, for
Yes.
to ensure the freedom that we all enjoy, that allows us to be bearded crazies on the air right now. So thank you for everybody. Yeah, that's right. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great night. We will see you later. Good night.